Hey, welcome back to Well, That's Interesting, the We Really Don't Deserve Them edition. Today is episode 232, When Exposed to Currency, African gray parrots chose to share, and another study that reveals the amazing lives of honeybees. My friends, I just so happen to be writing the notes of this episode on the corporate holiday of Valentine's Day, which is quite serendipitous, because today, the theme is very much about a certain type of affection only a few species have been observed exhibiting. I'm talking about altruism, or selfless giving, which, if you stop and think about it, for an animal in the wild, this could be a dangerous choice. Sharing food, limiting one's own reproduction, adopting a different species into your pod, or even taking time out of your very short lifespan to help another animal in distress, these are all behaviors researchers have documented over the years. For example, as reported by the National Aquarium's website, aqua.org, vampire bats must eat every 70 hours to avoid starvation. But nonetheless, it's a common sight to see one bat regurgitate small amounts of their own food, aka blood, into the mouths of roost mates that did not feed. And that is so nice of them. In 2011, behavioral ecologists Alexander Wilson and Jens Krauss of the Leibniz Institute of Freshwater Ecology and Inland Fisheries in Germany discovered a group of sperm whales that had taken in an adult bottlenose dolphin with an S-shaped spinal deformity. And get ready to cry, because for 8 days, the dolphin traveled, foraged, and played with both the adult whales and their calves. This was the first time an interspecies bond with sperm whales was witnessed. Here's another example. Way the fuck back in episode 122, we met Dr. Dominique Potvin, an Australian ornithologist who, with their team, developed a new wearable GPS device that they felt would be small enough not to interfere with or discomfort a medium-sized bird like the legendary magpie. But before rolling them out, they started off with a small test sample on 5 local magpies. Now, if you haven't had a listen as to what happened after they slipped the GPS trackers on them, I don't want to give it all away here. But let's just say, this backpack-looking device didn't sit well with the birds. Within 10 goddamn minutes, quote, an adult female without a tracker was busy trying to remove the harness from a younger bird, eventually succeeding, end quote from Gizmodo.com. In episode 122, we also learned how many pigeons it would require to lift the average person and a launch chair to the height of Australia's Q1 skyscraper. The answer is so many it would destroy everything. I mean it. It would take a number of pigeons weighing 3.5 times 10 to the 46th power in kilos, meaning you'd need more pigeons than there are on Earth, and that just so happens to be more mass than there is in the galaxy. Anyway, one final example. In episode 177, we pivoted to apes, where we saw for the first time unrelated bonobos sharing food, grooming, even forming alliances to smite a rival. In sum, cooperating and being altruistic. Today, in the first half of the show, we are giving the floor back to birds, specifically African gray parrots. Dr. Desiree Brooks and August van de Beyen from the Max Planck Institute for Ornithology and co-authors of the paper we're about to bite into, they got to thinking. Quote, parrots and corvids, crows and ravens are really known for being the brightest birds around. They're often referred to as feathered apes, and they've been tested in many studies on problem solving or word learning, end quote, she said to Nicola Davis of The Guardian. But for them, a question remained. What about instrumental helping? Or rather, giving something you have to someone else for their benefit and expecting nothing in return, aka altruism. My friends, we will review the ingenious experiment that the team designed to test if these birds have heart. And again, not to spoil anything, but I'm just going to say, if you need anything like a tasty piece of walnut, an African gray parrot would totally lend you the metal rings to buy one. You'll see what I mean in a minute. Then after the break, QR codes have made the comeback of the century, and when they're not directing you to a restaurant menu, they're being glued to the backs of tens of thousands of honeybees. Well, something very similar to them anyway. But don't worry, these tags are itty-bitty, and unlike what happened with the magpies, it seems these bees didn't give a damn. They were totally cool with them. Now, as to why entomologists and engineers did this, we will get into the brilliant setup designed by Margarita Lopez Urib, an entomologist at Pennsylvania State University, and their team. We will get into the massive number of bees tagged. And thanks to these tags smaller than a human pinky nail, we'll learn how long bees really travel for sweet, sweet nectar. This is one of the clearest pictures of how worker honeybees spend their days. The numbers will shock you. In the meantime, hello, I'm Jill Chacha, and if this is your first time listening, welcome to the flock, my equally busy business goose. To begin, I ask, have you ever woken up around 3 a.m. in a cold sweat, surrounded by what feels like perpetual darkness, and find yourself clawing at your face and screaming the question, "Dear non-binary Christ, if there's overwhelming experimental evidence for providing voluntary assistance and reciprocity in non-human mammals, why, oh why, hasn't there been the same for avian species?" You're in luck. Today's the day where we talk about a revolutionary new experiment that shows at least one species of bird not only has a big-ass brain, but a big-ass heart to match. My friends, please join me, will you, at a different Max Planck Institute, this one not for space, but the Max Planck Institute for Ornithology in Germany. It was here Desiree Brux, an animal and behaviorist at ETH Zurich in Switzerland, and August von Bayern, an animal behaviorist at Max Planck. They teamed up to test the limits of generosity in parrots, specifically that of the African gray. And because I'm so generous and have very little impulse control, I have no choice but to tell you fun facts about the African gray, and I have to use that to explain why they were chosen for this non-mammalian study on kindness. Let's talk about their intelligence. On average, they exhibit the same intelligence level as a toddler. They could identify, request, refuse, categorize, and quantify more than 80 different objects and respond to questions about those objects concerning their color and shape, for example. As reported by worldanimalprotection.org.uk, in their natural habitat, African gray parrots can travel up to 10 kilometers or 6 miles a day. They live in flocks with thousands of individuals, put a pin in that, by the way, and have an average lifespan of 60 years. So, if you're considering an African gray as a pet, please be ready to care for a smart-ass, energetic toddler with a blade on its face for the next 6 decades. If you do have this capacity, please know that up to 21% of the wild African gray population is poached each year to supply the illegal wildlife trade. So please be sure you know who you're adopting from. And finally, they also, quote, really like walnuts, said Desiree to Catherine Wu of SmithsonianMag.com. Quote, they don't get them in their normal diet, so it's quite a good reward, end quote. Well, my equally delicious business goose, thanks to the wild intelligence of African grays and a little conditioning using this rare treat, the researchers were able to begin their experiment by first associating metal tokens with walnuts. A total of 8 African gray parrots were used as the experimental group, and 6 blue-headed macaws acted as the control. All of them were individually trained to exchange those tokens for food when a human held out their hand. So essentially, these birds just learned currency. And in terms of a currency rate, 1 token gets you 1 nice piece of walnut, and I have to say, in today's market, that's a fucking deal. With this simple step complete, it was time to nosedive into what would turn out to be one complex show of cognitive ability. My friends, please drop whatever bullshit currency you're holding right now and pick up your phone. If you head on over to our social media stuffs and tap on today's post, you're going to see a series of screenshots of one session that perfectly encapsulates how this experiment unfolded. Now, if you're too busy training animals yourself about the pitfalls of capitalism and your hands are full, don't worry. I'll go through this experiment's design and details for you. Please imagine a large clear plastic box. Thank you. Now, if you would, divide that box in half with a clear plastic divider. Wonderful. And now here comes the best part. We're going to add holes. In the middle of that divider, please punch out a circle. And if you would, on one side of the box, you're going to make 2 holes, one to the left side of the divider and one to the right. Now, underneath the hole to the right, please make a slit. And think of this as like the dispenser of an ATM. My friends, this was the straightforward design of the box where 2 of the same species of bird were placed. And very similarly to the world we live in, you know, the one where the top 1% owns around 50% of all global wealth, and the top 10% holds approximately 85% of all global wealth, the parrot inside the right side of this box was given 10 tokens, or rather, all the fucking tokens. Yeah, this bird has 100% of the wealth. Now, if you have our social media stuffs open, you'll see a screenshot of a human counting out the 10 tokens and sliding them through that ATM slit to the bird named Jello, and it's fucking payday for Jello. But, of course, not for the literally poor African gray parrot inside the left-hand portion of the box, and that little guy is named Jack. Jack got jack shit. Now, although we just started this experiment, there's already a twist. For you see, the hole on the right side of the box is plugged up, meaning our extravagantly wealthy parrot has no way to exchange their tokens for some sweet, sweet walnuts at this time. So, what the fuck did Jello decide to do with all its wealth? Did it hoard their tokens and wait until that nut hole became clear? Did Jello launder the tokens into art or real estate so they wouldn't be taxed? Drumroll, please. Thank you in the back. Quote, even without the promise of a reward for themselves, 7 out of 8 of the African gray parrot donors passed some of their available tokens through the transfer hole to their broke partners, usually shuttling them beak to beak. On average, about half the metal rings made it through, allowing the recipients to trade the trinkets for walnuts through another window. End quote from Catherine Wu of SmithsonianMag.com. Yeah, my equally generous business goose, you heard that right. Nearly every gray except one asshole gave their tokens away to a bird in need, and they did so with a physical transfer through the divider in their cage. Now, if that pulls on your heartstrings, you're not alone. Desiree told Wu, quote, it was amazing to see. I thought that when they saw they weren't getting anything that they'd stop. But they just kept doing it. Some transferred all 10 of their tokens. End quote. Well, I just saw you wipe a tear from your eye, but I can also see you have a thought. You're thinking, I wonder, did some birds try and give more to others? And what if this was just something the donors did for fun since they didn't have anything else to do? Oh, and what the fuck happened with the macaws? I almost forgot about them. Such great questions. I'm so glad you asked and remembered the macaws. Let's start with who gave to whom and how much. It seems relationships did have an impact here. The stronger the social bond the birds shared, some of whom were directly related, the more rings were passed from donor to receiver. Now, because of this, quote, the results can't be generalized to all kinds of parrot partnerships, said Irene Pepperberg, an animal cognition expert who studies African gray parrots at Harvard University, but wasn't involved in this study, to Catherine Wu of Smithsonian Mag. But she did go on to say, quote, understanding how members of other species respond to friends in need is an important pursuit, end quote. Which means it's time to unpin that pin about wild grays living in flocks of hundreds or even thousands. According to the team study, efficiently called Parrots Voluntarily Help Each Other to Obtain Food Rewards, AGPs form flocks of up to 1,200 individuals with fission-fusion dynamics during foraging. End quote. That is basically just a fancy pants way of saying a shit ton of African grays gather in huge flocks at night, but split into smaller groups during the day to forage together. So this behavior of giving and understanding the needs of another bird for the latter to achieve their goal of not fucking starving to death is probably hardwired in them. Which leads us to those macaws. Let's just say they're more like your typical billionaire. They kept almost 90% of their metal rings to themselves, 90%. And on the rare occasion they did make a transfer, it was more like, here you go, you fucking bum, because they basically dropped the currency onto the floor of the recipient rather than give it to them like beak to beak. Now, as to why, again, just like billionaires, quote, they live in smaller flocks, possibly with a more hierarchical structure and a lower emphasis on sharing resources. Indeed, in another test, the team found these birds were less keen than African gray parrots on sharing a bowl of food with their peers. End quote from Nicola Davis of The Guardian. The African gray's kickassery continues when you rule out them doing the token pass for fun or just doing it as an automated response. To test this, the team set up the experiment as usual, but did not extend a hand to the poor/tokenless bird and plugged up the tokenless bird's nut hole as well. Yes, that is a sentence I wrote. As a result, the donor bird transferred far fewer tokens as there were no dealings being had. There was no need to pass the rings, and they fucking understood this. Now, this all sounds amazing and inspirational, but it gets better. My friends, unbeknownst to the birds, the next round of experiments included swapping roles. Yeah, the wealthy parrot lost it all, and the poor African gray became wildly rich beyond their dreams just by lifting themselves up by their bootstraps, just like in real life. Anyway, guess what happened? Yes, you're absolutely right. From the study, quote, help was reciprocated, as more transfers in the preceding session resulted in more transfers in the following session, end quote. AKA, the more tokens a bird had previously given, the more they received in return. And again, this happened without the birds knowing they were going to swap roles. I mean, how the fuck would you tell them anyway? After the break, we're leaving Germany for rural Pennsylvania and rural New York and swapping one smart aleck for another, the Western honeybee. We'll also be diving into another study that's a first of its kind, and it revealed more about the everyday lives of these fuzzy fuckers more than ever before. You'll want to stay tuned. Stay tuned.
As a small business owner, my favorite thing about posting a job on LinkedIn is that when I hit post, I clock out and LinkedIn clocks in.
LinkedIn makes it easy to post your job for free, get qualified candidates, and manage them all in one place. Plus, LinkedIn extends the reach of your job post by allowing you to share it with your network. And hiring managers that add a hiring frame to their LinkedIn profiles receive 2 times more qualified applicants. Go to linkedin.com/achieve to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply.
This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Do you ever find yourself playing the budgeting game? Well, with the Name Your Price tool from Progressive, you can find options that fit your budget and potentially lower your bills. Try it at Progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Price and coverage match limited by state law. Not available in all states.
And we're back. We are so back. And my friends, I ask, have you ever woken up around 3 a.m. in a cold sweat, surrounded by what feels like perpetual darkness, and find yourself clawing at your face, screaming the question, "Dear genderless Jesus," because of the large size of honeybee colonies, which can reach 20,000 individuals, and the year-long activity period of the colony? Studying foraging behavior through direct observations is generally a time-consuming endeavor and nearly impossible. Is there any way around this? If this has happened to you, you're in luck. You're not alone. Margarita Lopez Urib, an entomologist at Pennsylvania State University, was also troubled by this problem. In certain fields of biology, like entomology, researchers make observations with wee human eyes. So when you're dealing with tiny flying wild subjects who number in the thousands, it can be difficult to get an accurate reading about this simplest thing, like for how long and for how far a single bee travels to forage. As so wonderfully explained by Margarita in a PSU press release, quote, "The waggle dance is the best source of information that we have about bee foraging. But that's based on human observations, with maybe an hour of observations made once a day over 2 weeks." End quote. With this method, previous studies have suggested honeybees fly up to 6.2 miles or 10 kilometers from their hive. But knowing this is based on really limited information, we must ask, is 6 miles really the distance for an average flight? And even if you wanted to answer this question with hard numbers to back it up, where do you even start? You'd have to do something crazy, like, I don't know, develop an automated imaging system for monitoring the in and out activity of each damn bee as they walk through a customized entrance with a camera sensor so that camera could pick up a customized ID. This sounds bonkers. But guess what? This is what happens when employees use a badge to swipe themselves into an office building. Yeah, my friends, we already do this to ourselves. So the task here would be to replicate it for bees. Is that even possible? You're damn right it is. Let's get into it. My approachable business goose, entomologist Margarita, turned to Julio Urbana, professor of electrical engineering and co-corresponding author of the study we're waggling into right now, and to Diego Penaloza Aponte, a doctoral student in electrical engineering and fellow co-corresponding author. Now, this collaboration is about to pull on your heartstrings because for the first time in this team's individual careers, they had to branch out beyond their comfort zones to fully understand how to make a project like this a reality. Quote, the experts spent time as novices in each other's disciplines to better understand the specific needs and limitations. The electrical engineers worked in the field, learning firsthand how to handle and monitor bees, while the entomologists visited the lab to learn what considerations go into designing and building automated technology, end quote, from psu.edu. So, after weeks of what I can only assume were many an instance of being stung and accidentally electrocuted, what did the team's newfound knowledge create? Drumroll, please. Thank you in the back. Please drop whatever work badge you're holding, quit your job, and pick up your phone. Head on over to today's posts at our social media stuffs and swipe past all those adorable, courteous African greys, and you shall see a pretty sweet setup. No pun intended. If you're too busy quitting your job and you can't take a look, don't worry, I could describe this ingenious apiary, or enclosure where a colony of bees is kept, just for you. Now, if you're familiar with beekeeping, please imagine that structure, which is something like a stacked set of filing drawers. But of course, on the inside, you won't find paper, but racks of bees. Now, the inside isn't what we're focusing on here. We're more concerned with the entrance/exit. If you have the photo up, you'll see an additional white box attached to the lower right-hand corner. My friends, inside that white box is a camera. And below the box is a slit, and it's the only way in and the only way out. This tracking camera ran 24 hours a day, 7 days a week at the entrance of 6 colonies. And if you're wondering what in the holy hell these cameras were tracking and how, have yourself a seat because this is where it gets wild. The researchers used something called April tags, or something similar to QR codes, that were glued to the worker bee's thorax or back without impeding her movement or causing harm. Every 2 goddamn weeks, throughout the spring and summer, the team tagged 600 young bees that had emerged from their cells across the 6 colonies. By the end of all the gluing and all the tagging, the team ended up giving 32,000 bees little badges. Yeah, and you fucking bet I have a photo of one of them over at our social media stuffs. Take a damn look. Now, if you're wondering why they chose brand spanking new bees, Robin Underwood, Penn State Extension educator in apiculture, say that 3 times fast, and co-author on the paper said it best, quote, we targeted young bees so we could track their age more accurately, especially when they start to fly and when they stop. Young bees are also softer, and they don't sting yet, so they're easier to handle, end quote. Kudos to the engineers for figuring that one out personally. Now, if you're wondering what the fucking April tag is, I did too, so I gave the team's paper a look-see, and I have to say, they really planned everything to a T. According to their paper, titled Automated Entrance Monitoring to Investigate Honeybee Foraging Trips Using Open Source Wireless Platforms and Fiduciary Tags, QR codes are fucking finicky. I mean, sure, they store hundreds of bytes of data, but they demand high resolution and precise, fine alignment for detection. We have all struggled with these fuckers when all I want to do is pick a cocktail. That's all I want to do. Anyway, the April tags are way chiller. They could be detected under conditions that very much resemble a beehive. Low resolution, poor illumination, and they can handle random rotation. And best of all, with this system, multiple tags can be detected simultaneously in a cluttered image. It is perfect for the entrance of a busy bee colony. So, in real time. The sensors would capture the little bee ID, the date, note the time, the direction of movement, like if they were leaving or entering the hive. It would note the temperature. In sum, all of this was to figure out, when did a worker leave? And when did they come back? So, what the fuck did the team discover when the system went live? Drum roll, please. Thank you again. Quote, the researchers found that most trips typically lasted 1 to 4 minutes, which could be to check the weather prior to foraging or to defecate outside the hive. That's right. They may have detected poop breaks, and that is an absolute first. Continuing the quote, longer trips typically lasted less than 20 minutes, but 34% of the tagged bees spent more than 2 hours away from the hive. This could reflect an unusually long foraging trip, a bee who never returned, or a missed detection if the bee entered the hive upside down. During some weeks, with fewer flowers available, more bees spent more time foraging, likely because they had to travel farther to find adequate food. End quote. So, although there is room for improvement for this experiment setup, which, by the way, only cost $1,500 per apiary and is completely solar-powered, bee foraging, in general, can be, it can vary greatly, from like 20 minutes to 2 hours. But it turns out the wildest findings weren't about foraging at all. This may have rewritten bee lifespans. Honeybees are believed to live for about 28 days or about 4 weeks, but the researchers saw the same bees checking in and out for 6 weeks. So it's very possible they live a lot longer than we thought, and that's great fucking news. Now that we have foraging times, the team is now working with researchers from Virginia Tech to align this data with what we know about the waggle dance to continue investigating how far bees travel from their hive. So, get this. Essentially, they'll be turning these numbers into dance moves, and then the dance moves into miles. This is going to be cool. Watch this space. And thank you for listening, rating, subscribing, telling your friends about African greys and just how cool they are. And then ask your friends for $5. See what they do, and then judge them. Tell them about the honeybees and the QR codes on their back. It's so cute. And a generous thanks to the folks over at Airwave Media, the podcast network to which WTI belongs. If you love this show, and you do, you love the other podcasts in this family, and please, stay interesting.